वहां जाकर कंप्यूटर में जाकर मैंने कश्मीर लिखा तो हजारें किताब आई हैं और एक भी नहीं मुसलमान से, एंड ऑल इंडियंस, एंड सारा बकवास। अगर घबरा गए, अगर डर गए तो मर गए। So I think that when it comes to Kashmir, we have to continue, but we have to target international peer-reviewed journals, okay? That's absolutely fundamental, and our journals here have to be aligned. Take your time, but do it. Align with Scopus journals, because all the universities now, they don't recognize your journal if it's not from Scopus. If it's not peer-reviewed, they're not going to respect it. If you're publishing it yourself, अपने पैसे लगा के, nobody respects it. कि ये कोई भी कर सकता है. So go through the proper channels, and then our narrative will be in those places where it hasn't been effective. You know, when I went to the University of Canada Library, first time I entered the library, I was like 17 years old. और फिर मैं University Library गया और फिर मैंने वहाँ जाकर कंप्यूटर में जाकर मैंने कश्मीर लिखा तो हजारें किताब आई हैं और एक भी नहीं मुसलमान से, and all Indians, and सारा बकवास। The history, they falsified the history, they falsified the identity, so much so that a lot of people no longer recognize it. And this was interesting for me growing up, because the stories that I heard of what is Kashmiri are very different than other places. वो कहते हैं ना, यहाँ तो बेशुमार चीज़ें हैं जो अब एक लिहाज से गायब हो गई हैं in the tradition, because this is what India tried to do. In my conversations with Dr. Khalid Bashir Butt, he is mashallah, and his book was just brilliant. But in my conversations with him, I realized, he goes, look, since the 1970s, especially, India has been targeting the educational identity of Kashmiris, confusing them about where their origins are, and they've been doing this to Pakistan too. And Pakistan has to be better, more successful at competing this. Just the other day I was speaking about this. We need to understand the way English is used. So let me give you an example. Here in Pakistan they use the word caste. It's incorrect. So in one of my first classes on Buddhism, because religious studies was my second minor in university, undergraduate degree, the teacher came and the first thing the teacher said is, Buddhism is fundamentally different than Hinduism on one key characteristic, that there are separations of people into farmers and warriors in society. That's not the issue. There is social mobility between the classes. And this is very important, social mobility between. So she said, do not refer to Buddhists as a caste society. Now this is an academic, a professor, who herself was actually Chinese, and she was teaching the intellectual difference between Buddhism and what we know today as Hinduism. And this is very important. The word caste we misuse and misunderstand as Zat or Bradari, but it's completely different, the meaning and the impact. And now, okay, so now we recognize that your ethnic composition, yani meri jo nasl hai, right, the blood, that is not your caste. It's also your social position in life, and within Hinduism there's no movement between the so-called castes. So we should not equate ethnic and Baradari with caste. We should not use this word at all, actually, because this is one of the ways that we can target the India and its inequality, because caste is seen as unequal. Inequality as seen as unjust. Unjust as seen as criminal. And this is Yiddu Dunya ka nazam. So when we are speaking in this way and we use this terminology to describe, just ye Pakistan to mashhoor hai, ye Dar hai, ye Butt hai, ye Wani hai, to ye to hai Kashmiri zaatein. Baradari pura, but these are particular zaatein. मेरे नाना अल्लाह जन्नत नसीब थे गुलाम हुसैन भट्ट और मेरी दादी जुबैदा डार. So it's understandable. These are the zati. But when we speak in a way, and I'm trying to highlight this point of being more effective at the language we use, when we use this word caste to describe, then all the images that are coming in the minds of Westerners, the way they understand the English language, because English is my first language. So when I hear it and I know what they're thinking, well, they're all unequal. They're the same. And this creates problems for us. This puts impediments in the way that we need to negotiate and interact with the world. And this is how Pakistan has sometimes been ineffective in pushing its policies forward. So I just wanted to give a little bit of that background. And the article that I published in Doha News, and Doha News is one of the biggest English-speaking, English-centric newspapers in Doha. And it's government-run. तो मैं भी हैरान कि उन्होंने मुझे फ़ोन करके कहा कि आप लिखने के लिए तैयार हैं? मैंने कहा बेशक, कितने घंटों में चाहिए? तो हंसने लग गए. उसने कहा मुझे 2 दिन में दे दे. मैंने कहा it's okay. Should Qatar offer mediation over Kashmir? And ये सवाल उन्होंने मुझसे पूछा. So then of course now there's several layers of understanding a situation effectively. And अव्वल हम कहते हैं कि अल्लाह सुब्हानहू व तआला मुझे ये हिदायत दे. शुरू करते हैं अल्लाह के नाम पर. और जो ऐसे करते हैं मैं उन लोगों को भी इज्जत कर देता हूँ. This is the right way to start. First you say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide me. Make sure that I'm thinking along the right track. Now, Qatar has a series of problems in its region. I should understand those problems. And then I should understand how does Qatar deal with those problems. And then how can I contribute and how can my problem be a part of their solution, right? So Qatar is isolated in the Khalij. It's isolated, and as a matter of fact, Man Ispe Likabia has been published actually in 2 journals, one in particular on the role of Saudi Arabia, UAE, the word was the quartet. So Bahrain, Egypt, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, they had plans for a military invasion of Qatar. This is no exaggeration. This is what they had prepared for. And ये देखें, ये भी इसमें भी एक इशारा है. The country that did the most to prevent that was which one? No. Iran probably wanted to support it. That's completely wrong thinking. It was Turkey. Right? Just on a side point, I just want everyone to know, like, people aside, we love all people. We're not talking about people here. But the role of Iran when it comes to the policies in the region, they're very problematic for anyone who studies it. And there is a type of romanticism, I could say, affiliated with what Iranian policy is, because it so openly and blatantly stands up to North America, stands up to the US. Lambe lambe chakre wo shaitan ki, right? Karte rehte hain. But the reality, and I would recommend read Trita Parsi, Unholy Alliance. Everybody should read that book, right? It's written by an Iranian. Read Trita Parsi, read Nader Hashemi, another Iranian, brilliant writer. And read Sayyid Hussein Nasr. So let's leave this romanticism of Iran as standing against the West and all the world. This is absolutely false. The narrative is false, right? And you can see even how they behaved with Azerbaijan and Armenia. They were supporting Armenia against Azerbaijan. And they have their own huge Azeri population. But nonetheless, coming back to the point, leaving aside the romanticism, leaving aside the, let's say, perhaps very emotional or sometimes whimsical ideas, and looking at the facts. How does someone vote in the United Nations? How are they supporting, let's say, the ground? Who are they funding? Any country for that matter. But look, coming back to Qatar, these are all very relevant questions. Who was helping Qatar the most was Turkey. But who became mashhur for helping them within the Khalij, everybody else, especially Kuwait. That baad mein aaya hai. Because it's easier for Qatar today to say that a fellow Arab Kuwaiti helped me than a Turk Musliman helped me. This is also the reality of the world. That there is almost this type of apprehension. There is a type of narazgi ki Musliman kyun kar raha hai? Nahi, ye Arab kar rahe hain. And they want to emphasize qawmiyat, and they do it. I'm there 14 years. They emphasize qawmiyat. और जब भी मैं ये इस पर गौर करता हूँ ना, तो वो अल्लाह सुब्हानहू तआला ने कुरान में जो वो कहानी हमें बताया गया था, जब इब्लीस, the king of the angels, जब अल्लाह सुब्हानहू तआला ने उससे कहा कि झुक जाओ आदम अलैहिस्सलाम, उसने कहा नहीं। क्यों? क्योंकि मैं जो आग से बना हूं और ये तो खाक से बना है, तो ये तो कौमियत नहीं है। मैं अरब हूं, ये गैर अजम है, ये भी मैं कश्मीरी हूं, ये गैर कश्मीरी है। सेम सिकनेस। और this sickness is so dangerous. It's really nationalism, right? This sickness is what led to the fall of Iblis. तो फिर उसके हरकत ने देखे ना, तो फिर उसने क्या कि आप भी गलती है, अल्लाह सुब्हानहू तआला को कह कि आपने मुझे गलत रास्ते तक लेके जाए. So that's also the psychology of the person on the wrong track. He's blaming everybody else for their own failure. It's our failure. Don't blame. But imagine if you could blame Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And on what? That he was taqabbur qarataki. This my nasl is from fire. So we have to understand all these variables that are not just ongoing within, let's say, the Muslim world, but especially within Qatar. So taking all of this into consideration, knowing the threat that they were under, knowing that they're isolated, and then also knowing their ideology. They are completely, in my opinion, ideologically strong. मजबूत हैं और उनका नियत सीधा, straight. कि हमने फिलिस्तीन को नहीं छोड़ना और हमने ये इख्वान को नहीं छोड़ना और हमने तुर्की के साथ नहीं छोड़ना. और फख्र से कहते हैं, ये भी मैं, क्योंकि मैं इतना देर हो गया वहाँ, मैं बड़ी खुशी से देखता हूँ that maybe 90% of the ministers and जो अमीर तरीन royal family के जो हैं बच्चे बच्चियाँ कतर यूनिवर्सिटी में पढ़ती हैं और हिजाब लेती हैं, उनकी जो रस्में हैं जो मुसलमानों की, राइट. तो मैं ये देखकर मैं कहता हूँ कि in how many countries are the elites sending their children to their own universities? क्या करेंगे यहाँ? पाकिस्तान अल्लाह का करम से माशाल्लाह. I tell you, even as a faculty member, wherever I go, whether it's in Canada or the US or Washington, wherever I've taught at the universities, Pakistan is the smartest. Hands down. Smartest students that I found. With their English ability, with their ability to understand, humbleness. This is my experience. I'm just, even sitting back, I'm watching it. This is how they are. But do we send our children to our own schools? No, we don't. वो कोशिश करते हैं कि हमको कहीं ना कहीं बाहर कहीं भेजा जाए, right? So this चीज पे मैं बड़ा खुश हूँ. Vaughn Decker. So they love their tradition. They said that if we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on institutions, we need to invest. And if we are investing, are we going to invest for others? But this is smart, right? So inshallah, the work that's going on right now in the education field is critical for Pakistan. Essential. Inshallah, it's successful. But the report that they produced is brilliant. There was Dr. Ghazala was a part of it, right? And then there's this whole team that was put together by Imran Khan. This is essential. But we need to understand all these variables when we try to negotiate some kind of a strategy in an area. So it's not easy. You cannot miss out on certain essential variables. So know where Qatar is. कहते हैं ना, इंसान, zaman, adyan, makan. So all of these things we need to understand in Arabic. So okay, first you understand the insan, then you understand the zaman, the time that we're living, makan, the place that he's in, adyan, the values that are guiding. And then you collectively look at this and say, okay, where do we fit in this? And looking at all of this, I put forward a suggestion. Looking at all of this, just to give you the background, right? To understand how do you formulate a theory? How do you formulate a strategy? And I also want to give advice to everybody because I believe these are the ones that effectively work. And all of these are relevant to this. And now look at how Qatar has responded. And this is a lesson for everybody, right? So when Qatar was threatened with all of this violence and all of this, military threat, it came on television. CBS actually had a flagship show, 60 Minutes. And His Highness Sheikh Tamim was there. And they asked him that, look, the accusations against you, Your Highness, are very serious. Supporting terror. Hamas is there, right? You have Taliban offices there. So the way that the picture was being painted was supporting the narrative of the Saudis and Emiratis that the Qataris are supporting terror. Now the interesting thing is, agar ghabrage, agar darge, to mar gaye. And what did they say? They said, you told us to bring them here. Now this is a lesson for everybody. Look at how their politics was. They did not try to say, oh yaar, America naraz ho jayega, hum ye to nahi kehenge कि उन्होंने तो हमें कहा कि हमास का खोलें, तालिबान का खोलें. तो इसलिए मैंने खुलेआम कहा कि okay, open up, bring people from wherever you want. Bring people to analyze the Kashmir issue. You choose whoever you want. Bring them. There's lots of people. So my first suggestion was going along with this trust and this honesty and this clarity, then do that. Include people, because Qatar's main role in foreign policy to defend itself against outward aggression has been through the use of mediation and peacekeeping. So to understand this is why I put the proposal forward. This is why I give you the background of understanding people when you want to give a policy. Qatar is essentially the core of its foreign policy is mediation and peacekeeping. So naturally then, this is a meet. So our then objective is to show them how serious the conflict is in the world, knowing that about their foreign policy, and then suggesting that, look, not only have you been honest and brave before, but be honest now and be brave now, right? And then on top of that, this is a very serious global issue. So now that's how I bring the argument forward. I tie it into their own foreign policy, which is centered on mediation, and then I move forward and say, number one, look at the region. Inside Qatar, it feels its number one threat in the region actually is not necessarily from Saudi Arabia, which is improving, but from the UAE. The relationship between the UAE and India is very strong. So now, this is how I convinced him in the second step. I said, well, first, you are centering your foreign policy on mediation. Second, you've been brave in the face of the threat of military invasion. You spoke the truth and people respect you for it. You said that you, Americans, told me to open the Hamas office because this is what they do. They want to speak to all sides. They just don't want to feel responsible. And aapko bhi dekhenge ki kitna darta hai. So they play, and most of our people get scared. And that's wrong. So then I brought in the whole idea that, look, you were against the normalization. You realize the threat it poses. What about the threat it poses now with China and India? So this is the next equation I bring in. So China and India, not only this is recent, I just finished an article on it, by the way. But this is something very serious. It's not going to go away. And now America is trying to grab everybody and push it in its corner, trying to push India to do more against China. But China will not play this game. You know, मैं मजाक में दोस्तों को कह रहा था कि the Indians have this policy, भाग कर चूंटी मार कर भागेंगे कि मैंने तो उसको बड़ा मारा है, and शोर मचाना. Typically, cowardly way that they operate. And a lot of times I think Pakistan just lets it go. Doesn't react in the same way, I think that there are better ways. And imagine, you know, just in the last 5 years, there's almost more than 9,000 incidences of bombardment on the line of control, so-called ceasefire line. 9,000? Imagine what they are thinking, you know. So this is, they could never do this type of thing with China. Because it was not hesitant that when it comes to, sometimes you have to fight. And when your opponent senses a little bit of weakness in you, then they take advantage of that, right? So nonetheless, overall, then that's the thing I brought into the equation, that look, this fight, and especially the fight over the Asia Pacific, is accelerating. They're trying to contain China. So this India-China rivalry, the role of the US in this rivalry, I said it's critical from that perspective that look, you should now have some interests in Kashmir. So I brought that because it's in Ladakh. So it's that area. And then I brought in the nuclear equations. Now look, now you have 3 countries nuclear armed and the middle is Kashmir. So I wanted to convince them, and I think, and it's not being sneaky, fact is that the UAE has policies against Qatar. India is tight with them. Can you trust? And you want to be closer to India? In the beginning, this is what the general trend was. Can you trust? And then, imagine, so Palestine is so important for you. India has now completely voted against it. Before, you know, they used to play this card, oh, we're with the Palestinians. Bevakoof sabko banate the, right? Jitne bhi unke giraye rishte hain now with the Yahudis, and then they used to say that no, we're still with the Palestinians. They make fools out of everybody. But the truth is now with the Modi government, it's completely upended this narrative. They voted against the Palestinians openly now, and everyone knows about this relationship. It's so wide open. Ek dusre ke jabbi maar rahe hain, you know, Netanyahu and Modi. So this is there. So I wanted to utilize that then to convince the Qataris, look at this, look at who their friends are. They're pro-normalization, you're anti. There's a US-China rivalry that now is in every academic paper everywhere. And then also everyone has their supporters, and India's on the other side. So now you need cards against India. What will you do? So this is how I wanted to share with you from the beginning how I formulated my theories, how I presented it. Then I looked at the present reality, and then I suggested these are the reasons why that you need to do the mediation. Right? It's your foreign policy. It supports your Palestinian vision, the truthfulness. You also not only have to be pro something, you have to be careful of your opponents, how they're trying to weaken you. And who are your opponents? UAE. Who's the best friends of the UAE? India. What is this growing rivalry between the US and China? How is India a central player in this? And they can't see it. Some Indian voices are saying, look, this is very dangerous business we're getting into. Let's be neutral. But the Hindutva fascists have shot it down completely. You can't even talk like that. So considering all of these, those are the steps and suggestions I made to rationalize and convince the Qatari government that you should, in your own interest, And also, this is serving our interest. India will not accept. But India is desperate for energy. It just now was in Qatar trying to convince them, give us a better deal. And Qatar was not convinced. So things are shifting in our advantage. And so that, alhamdulillah, gives you the kind of, I wanted to share with everybody how I go about to analyze what were the variables in it, what did I use to justify my argument, and then how I presented it to them. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aap sabko say salamat khush rakhe. Thank you very much, and welcome the questions or any discussions you guys feel like.